Greetings everyone, my name is Bob and I have over 200 desktop builds under my belt. I have high standards for cable management and overall aesthetics. This is my review of HP's Omen 30L. Now our review unit has the RTX 3080 and an i9-10900K 10-core Intel CPU. These can be configured with various parts including AMD CPUs and GPUs. Hardware at this time is limited and what's available today will certainly change over time. Now let's start with the general hardware. Cooler Master actually provides the fans, the 80 plus platinum power supplies. We have a 750 watt unit for our configuration, and the CPU coolers, whether it's air or liquid. Ours is liquid with a single fan attached to a 120mm radiator at the top of the chassis. Memory will come from HyperX, and ours is 32 gigabytes of DDR4 at 3200 MHz. The M.2 drives are Western Digital Blacks, and these are pretty fast. The RTX 3080 and 90 series will use the reference board with a triple fan custom cooler, and the 70 series and below will use dual fans. The Micro ATX motherboard is Omen design with the Intel Z490 chipset. It has your average fin array mounted to the VRM for passive cooling. There's a single PCIe slot that will be occupied with your graphics card, and there's two M.2 slots. The top slot has a large heatsink for passive cooling as well, and the bottom M.2 slot has a plastic cover. There's also two slots for 3.5-inch hard drives. And finally, my unit came with the AX201 Wi-Fi 6, and all of my testing was on Wi-Fi. Basically, everything here is industry standard and replaceable. While it is a pre-built desktop, you aren't going to end up with a machine that you can't upgrade right down to the motherboard and power supply. The front I/O offers two USB 3 ports, separate headphone and mic, and the power button. The rear I/O offers several USB ports with varying speeds, one USB-C, local area network, and basic audio. Personally, I think the 30L chassis aesthetics look sleek and are further enhanced with the easily controllable RGB, solid cable management along with black cables. Graphics card will ship pre-installed and is very well braced too. I appreciate details such as the liquid cooler hose lengths. You can clearly see the inside hose is shorter than the outside, making a smooth connection that looks nice. Traditional water cooler AIOs are not custom fitted like this. The 30L footprint is relatively small. It's 17.5 inches tall, 16 3/4 inches in depth, and 6.5 inches wide. There's solid rubber feet on the bottom that offer good clearance for airflow, even for those who set their desktop on carpet, which is not something I typically recommend. There are non-removable filters on the top and bottom as well. To finish off the chassis aesthetics, the front and side panel are glass on the 30L, and in my opinion, I find this an attractive pre-built desktop. Omen products are controlled through the Omen software. It's here where you'll have control of your Omen hardware, whether it be the 30L desktop or any of the peripherals that I currently have connected. With that said, the HyperX Fury memory modules are recognized and have RGB control, as well as the single 120mm front intake fan, the Omen logo on the front of the chassis, and the interior light near the top. Each have separate RGB control, brightness, and can be turned off. The 3000 series NVIDIA GPUs do not currently have this control, however. Now it is here and only here where you can overclock the CPU. There's zero options for this in the BIOS. This certainly limits the enthusiast tuners out there, but many of those individuals would be building their own desktop. Perhaps this makes more sense from a pre-built desktop standpoint. Regardless, I appreciate the software integration into the hardware. With that said, I of course experimented with the self-overclocking software using the intelligent option and found instability during Borderlands 3. The machine rebooted itself twice and then reset the overclock, which is good. However, I was unable to open the Omen software. The solution here was to simply uninstall it and reinstall it from the Windows Store, and that happened to solve the issue. So just a heads up should this happen to you. Ultimately, we could do this on 10 different machines and get varying results, therefore a custom option should be your best bet to make sure it's dialed in. Performance on this spec was of course spectacular. These benchmarks are with stock settings, and our Firestrike graphics score was so close to 40K, I reran it with a little 100 MHz overclock just so I could see over 40,000 graphics score. Many of the gaming laptops I review are less than half this. Come on now, seriously, what do you expect here for gaming performance? The RTX 3080 is no joke, and the i9-10900K is able to push the system along nicely at the 1440p resolution tested. This is not a review on the 3080's performance. You can see that all over the internet. This is a review on the Omen 30L and how it copes with the hardware inside. So let's proceed. Within the Battlefield 5's firing range, the GPU was pulling up to its near maximum of 320 watts and the CPU around 120 watts, holding solid boost clocks. Everything is good. However, once the CPU temperature gets above 80 degrees Celsius, its fans ramp up regardless of the fan profile chosen. So with this desktop about as close as one would have it, combined with an ambient temperature of 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 21 degrees Celsius, and CPU temps trigger maximum fan speed, you'll hear the 30L roar away. Under high wattage stress like this, the GPU would get around 70 degrees and the CPU around 80 degrees, give or take a small, always occurring fluctuation. This is more of a worst case scenario, not only from a hardware standpoint, but the placement of the desktop being about as close as one would have it. Ultimately, there's a lot of power here inside this small chassis, and the beating I gave it playing game after game after game was a lot of fun. Many titles will not demand the most CPU performance, so there's a good chance you'll have a cooler and quieter experience. But on the flip side of that coin, where titles like Warzone abuse the CPU, it's not abnormal to see the i9 at 150 watts. Consider this overall performance, thermals, and noise about as hot and loud as you'd get, given the spec inside this 30L. Even a 350 watt RTX 3090 would be just fine in here, and everything below this will certainly run even cooler and or quieter. Alright, allow me to wrap this up. Number 1, from the end of 2011 to the beginning of 2017, I had put together around 1 to 2 desktop computers per week. Number 2, I was on forums such as OCN and H, combined post count of well over 10,000. We helped out many individuals on there on a daily, if not hourly basis, and pre-built desktop solutions were a big no. Number 3, I sat through HP's workshop covering the 30L. I had a whole mess of questions here that I intended on asking them, mainly about component selection. They answered all of these without me having to ask any questions, which shows that they're very proud and confident of their component selection. That's kind of nice to see, and I was not expecting that. Lastly, I get it. Many of you watching this, myself included, we are capable of building a slick desktop gaming computer, right? There's no doubt about that. But pre-builds exist for a reason, and HP knows that this is a niche market. But there's nothing wrong with providing a quality solution in a sea of pre-builds that most people would just not recommend. And the fact that they're willing to put very good fire and forget components inside a desktop that I am now able to recommend to people means less fires on your end, which is just not something you're going to forget. Alright folks, that's going to do it. Hopefully you enjoyed this unique perspective and review of the 30L from HP. I'm Bob of All Trades, and I hope to see you in the next video.